Go ahead and I think that should be starting up right about now as well. We're going to begin with just our regular opening ceremonies. I'll lead you in the pledge. I'll have Pastor Ledbetter open us in a word of prayer. And then when he's done with his prayer, Pastor Ledbetter, I'll go ahead and just let you do your address at the beginning. He's asked for a moment to speak, and of course Pastor Ledbetter and Lighthouse and Fairview Baptist make these meetings possible. They help facilitate us every month. They've been very faithful and supportive to everything we do. So of course the answer is always yes. If Pastor Ledbetter wants to speak, the answer is yes. So I'll have him speak. When he's done, I'm going to step back up here briefly. You won't have to look at me for too long, I promise. You can shield your eyes. But I'll give you our Voter's Guide from the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. I'll announce all of our organization's endorsements. I do want to clarify, these are not necessarily my endorsements. These are not necessarily Pastor Ledbetter's endorsements or Fairview Baptist's endorsements. These are the endorsements of the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. I also will then give a very brief update of the legislative session this year. It was a crazy one. I don't know if y'all paid attention. There was actually a special session that got called, and then basically nothing happened at it, so they just sat around arguing with each other for a week straight. But we'll talk about that. I'll try to make it all very brief because we've got a great conservative champion here today. Our guest speaker is Josh. He is in the house. Let's give him a quick round of applause. And for all of the candidates in the room, you'll have a chance to get recognized as well. There is a sign-in sheet going around, and we do have these little postcards that are also getting passed out. Tuesday, the 28th of next week, is the primary election. All of the candidates in this room, Josh, Cody, Rod, they're on the ballot Tuesday. In fact, they're on the ballot today because early voting started today. So get to the ballots as quick as you can, but if you are going to vote on Tuesday, the absolute last opportunity to speak to the candidates face-to-face, that's going to be this Monday at the Durant Public Library, 1515 Main Street, from 6 to 8. We've invited literally everybody on the ballot. Every single candidate whose name will be on any of the ballots for any voters anywhere in the 580 area code has received a direct invitation, and 17 of them have already confirmed, including every candidate for our state house race, every candidate for County Commissioner District 1, every candidate except for one who had to back out last minute for County Commissioner District 3, including federal candidates, including Josh Brecheen. You were the first federal candidate to get back to us. We appreciate that. And including several of the candidates running for statewide offices. So again, that'll be this Monday. But Pastor Ledbetter, if you want to come up and lead us in prayer.
Good evening, everyone. Would you stand with me for a moment as we go before the Lord in prayer here tonight? And thank you so much for coming. Our Father, we come before you tonight in the name of Jesus. We thank you for your presence here this evening. We thank you for a beautiful day. Having come from my family and my grandchildren today, I'm so grateful to you for this beautiful land we call America, in which we are free to raise our families, our grandchildren, and Father, we yearn to maintain that freedom going forward. In this election, Lord, it's more serious and more critical than any of the past elections, it seems like. They get more critical every year. Oh God, we pray that your sovereign will be done, that the outcomes, oh God, will be according to your will. We pray for favor and for blessing yet in a land that has gone astray. We pray, oh God, for time to continue to preach the word from sea to sea, and that one day we might see this entire country repent and turn back to you in every single way is our prayer. Thank you for these faithful who have come tonight. We love you, Father. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated, everybody. At these events, I always ask for an opportunity to give what I call a lighthouse moment. Speaking of Lighthouse America and a lighthouse moment, just a moment to talk about the great foundations upon which this nation is built. We are the only nation since the ratification of the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, we're the only nation to have been under one governing document our whole history. We've had more prosperity, more unity, more blessing than any other nation in history. The framers of this great land, the 55 framers walked, if you read them, if you read their writings, they had a wisdom that was otherworldly. It was beyond this world. And when you study their writings, they tell us where that wisdom came from. For instance, Noah Webster, he said, speaking of our Constitution and our liberties, he said the religion which has introduced civil liberty is the religion of Christ and his apostles, which enjoins humility, piety, and benevolence, which acknowledges in every person a brother or sister and a citizen with equal rights. This is genuine Christianity, and to this, he said, we owe our free constitutions of government. Did you hear that? To Christianity, to the Bible. He said in another place in the history of the United States, 1831, page 1, he said, a brief exposition of the Constitution of the United States of America will unfold to young persons the source of Republican principles. He said, it is this writer's sincere desire that our citizens early understand that the genuine source of correct Republican principles is the Bible, particularly the New Testament or the Christian religion. And because the framers founded this land on the rock of God's Word, and Jesus said, when you build your house on the rock, it doesn't matter what storm comes against it, your house will stand. And we have stood longer than any other nation in history under one founding document. But when you build your house on the rock, great things happen. We have an economic juggernaut. If we had a man in the White House that would leave us alone, we have an economic juggernaut that would blow the world's mind right now. This economy could explode right now with proper principle. It's not that hard. It's common sense. But we've enjoyed greater prosperity than anybody in history. 2020, we had a gross domestic product of $21 trillion with only 333 million people in our country. The same year, China couldn't even keep up with us. Their gross domestic product was only 14 trillion with 1.6 billion people. Nobody can keep up with us because we're built on the greatest principles ever known to man. Well, when it comes to having peace in our land, and that's why we're here tonight, having peace in our land is something that we are stewards of, and it comes down to how we vote. One of America's framers, Samuel Adams, said that when we vote, we are exercising one of the most solemn trusts in human society, for which we are accountable to God in our country, and that nothing is more important to our peace than electing people of exceptional character to public office. That's why you're here tonight, and I appreciate your accountability and for being here tonight. So here's the point of my message tonight, my lighthouse moment. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, dark money. And as a pastor and as a leader of Lighthouse America, I'm very concerned about what's happening in our country today. Dark money describes people who give money to a political action committee anonymously to often run attack ads against good people in office and good people who are running for office as well. And their intent in those attack ads is to remove good people from office or to prevent good people from getting into office and to insert their own candidates for office, usually with nefarious motives. Dark money people are people who do not care about you. They don't care about our state. They really don't care about our country except they just want to advance their own political agenda. And we're in a war in that regard. Do you see that in everyday life? We're in a battle to maintain this beautiful land we call America. Freedom's never free. The reason they give to a 503c4 political action committee is that they can give anonymously. We don't know who they are. They can give, and we don't know who they are. That's why it's called dark money. Sometimes from people within our state, oftentimes they're outside of our state trying to influence elections in our state, which I'll show you in just a moment. And as a pastor in this beautiful state, I'm concerned about this corrupt activity. It needs to be changed, needs to be stopped. Even if we just do away with a C4 political action committee, just get rid of it. I'm concerned that good, godly people are going to be removed from office like happened in 2018, and good, godly people will be prevented from being in office simply because they cannot face the big money influence from dark money people. I'm very concerned about that. We must stand and not allow this to happen. I received some flyers in the mail this week about Governor Stitt that are categorically untrue. Not a single statement was true. Every statement was a lie. I know it myself. Another candidate that's caught the attention of these dark money people is Cindy Byrd, our state auditor, who's running again for state auditor and inspector. Cindy loves God. She loves Oklahoma. She loves America. But she is a righteous person, and she's a highly trained auditor with a CPA. Her opponent doesn't have a CPA. He's not licensed, and he's not trained. But she is highly trained. She's done a great job, such a great job of auditing. She's uncovered $1.6 billion of questionable Medicaid expenditures. In another audit ordered by Governor Stitt, as you well know, she uncovered over $200 million of misappropriated public education dollars, the largest in state history, money used not really to advance the education of our children, but to line the pockets of people with nefarious motives. I thank God that 3 of those people, in my opinion, they were arrested today for racketeering. We ought to give a round of applause for that. I can't prove it, but I think the dark money, it's my suspicion, just Brother Bill's suspicion. That's all it is. But I suspect they're behind the dark money attacking Cindy Byrd to try to keep her out of office and raise their own candidate to office. That's just a suspicion. I probably shouldn't say it, but I have the right to say it too because I live in a free country. And so I'm saying it. And she's come under their magnifying glass because she's righteous. And you know that when you stand right, you're going to make somebody mad. We know that, don't we? And so Tulsa World announced the arrest of those 3 guys in the founders of that educational process. I thank God for that. One of our candidates running for office is a former outstanding Oklahoma State Senator. His name's Josh Brecheen. I received you can give him a round of applause tonight. And I received a flyer in the mail about him this week that is categorically untrue. I know him. I know everything he stood for. I think I know every piece of legislation he ever ran, surely. And I'm here to tell you, it's an absolute lie. I have it right here, and you can see it later. I'm not going to give it any credit by telling people what it says, but it's a lie. Dark money people who want to influence us wrongly for their own nefarious purposes. I'm going to close very quickly by saying this, that George Washington in his farewell address, September the 17th, 1796. And I got this quote from Senator David Bullard this week, and I asked him today via text if I could use it tonight. He gave me permission to use it. He said, George Washington said, however political parties may now and then, he said, however, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Our first president was warning us about dark money for today. That's the kind of wisdom they had. And that's what these folks are trying to do, is influence things for their own nefarious motives, and it must stop going forward. One of the attacks is on our Attorney General, John O'Connor. I have an ad here, a flyer about John O'Connor. Every statement is categorically untrue. It comes from some group in Alexandria, Virginia. They don't even put the name of the group on here. Whether you believe in God or not, or believe in the Bible or not, God's still real and the Bible's still true. We have a spiritual enemy named Satan. And if you give him a cloak of darkness like a C4 political action committee does, he will take advantage of that darkness to wreck things. It needs to stop. And this flyer on John O'Connor is totally untrue. And they're talking about the fact that he does not believe in the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. They attack him unbelievably, that he's doing nothing to stop the liberal gun grab. Well, I thought I would close my message tonight by allowing you to hear from Mr. O'Connor himself. He was invited to be here tonight. They asked me, should we come here or stay in Tulsa? And I said, how many people are you going to have in Tulsa? He told me. I said, you're going to have more people than we are. Stay in Tulsa because we need you to be in office. So he sent this to me, and I just want you to see this video here tonight, and let's let him talk about the Second Amendment. So listen, let me say this. When you get a flyer, realize not all of them are true. Can I get an amen? Amen. Let's watch this video. It's just a couple of minutes.
Hi, I'm John O'Connor. I've been working as your Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma for the last 10 months. Since Governor Stitt appointed me in July of 2021. I am honored to have the endorsement in this race for Attorney General of Oklahoma 2A, which is OK2A. It's a group that is very active in the state of Oklahoma, and they stand really for our protecting our rights and our freedoms and our liberties, and have historically focused a lot on the Second Amendment. And I'm a huge believer in the importance of the Second Amendment. I think it's there for a reason. Remember that when our nation was founded, they were reacting to the fact that they had been oppressed by kings and dictators. So they were going to make sure that Americans had the right to keep and bear arms. Number one, ultimately, to protect them against dictators and kings. And number two, to protect their homes and their families. I will tell you that I believe that the Second Amendment really is the protection for all the other amendments. Our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. We've seen in this woke culture that all of a sudden it's cool to silence people who disagree with you. While America, and certainly our trial system, are based on the collision of opposing ideals presented forcefully. We're a better nation when those ideas collide. But when we silence those ideas, when we silence free speech, tell people who disagree with us that we're canceling you, we actually hurt America. We actually don't live up to the First Amendment. And remember that our founding fathers and our founding mothers were very much into the rule of law and into the principles that govern our nation. Those principles have been fought for by our military over these generations, and now the rule of law is protected by our law enforcement officers, and we need to respect them. If America is disrespecting our law enforcement officers, then those of us in Oklahoma need to double our respect for our law enforcement officers. It's very important, but we have to protect our rights, and the Second Amendment needs to be left untouched so that the American people have the right to enjoy the benefits of all the other amendments and the Constitution of our nation. Please vote for me June 28 in the Republican primary for Attorney General. I'm John O'Connor. Thank you.
One last thing, if I may. By the way, isn't that fantastic? Whether you're going to vote for him or not, that's really good. That's truth right there. Amen. And so at Lighthouse America, I'd like to close by saying we do endorse Attorney General John O'Connor as our next Attorney General, although we respect the other candidate very much, he and his family. But we just believe in this guy here big time. And I also want to say tonight that Lighthouse Americans, and myself especially, we endorse Josh Brecheen for U.S. Congress.
Thank you, Pastor. If you'll please rise, we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so as I mentioned, we do have some information to present about what's happening at the state legislature. We're also going to announce all of the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association's endorsements for races that are going to be on our ballots Tuesday of next week, the 28th. As I was sitting there scrambling around on my phone, I realized that the notes I had that listed off all of the specific bills and endorsements are in my baby bag, which is now down in the child care room. A couple of things. Number one, everything I say here is not rehearsed. It's all completely sincere. These are my genuine sentiments. The speech I'd written to introduce Josh Brecheen, gone, but I will do my best to give you a truthful and helpful and meaningful introduction to our wonderful speaker today. And I actually don't think it's going to be that hard because, I've had a few opportunities to get to know Josh on a personal level. In terms of legislation, I do have some of these specific statistics memorized. I can tell you, for example, that at the beginning of the regular session for our legislator in this past session, we, the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association, helped to write and introduce 86 different pieces of legislation. And 9 of them were ultimately signed into law by the governor. 9 out of 86. That's not the sort of record you would expect out of our legislator. It's not, frankly, what the Second Amendment Association is accustomed to. We do have some great victories that we can talk about. We have legislation authored by candidates like Nathan Dahm, currently running for U.S. Senate. We have legislation from great senators like David Bullard, and taken together, these bills completely ban abortion in our state. Senator Bullard's bill took a particularly interesting approach. It took the tactics utilized by leftists to push the LGBTQ agenda and sort of turned them on their head and inversed them to create equal protection for the unborn in a court of civil law. In other words, what Senator Bullard's bill did was create civil liabilities, allowing any abortionist who has murdered an unborn child by abortion to be taken to a court of civil law and charged with wrongful death, the same as that doctor could be sued for wrongful death if he had aborted or killed any other child. The other piece of legislation, spearheaded primarily by Nathan Dahm, although Bullard was also a co-author on this, simply makes it illegal for a physician to perform an abortion. in our state, which, the counter argument was, well, you're wasting all of our time and money because the Supreme Court has already weighed in on this. Well, lo and behold, earlier this year we had the opinion leaked, the Dobbs opinion, which suggests that by the end of this month, Roe versus Wade may be a thing of history, right? And let's do a round of applause for that. Because I'll tell you, and I genuinely believe this, you can have abortion or you can have America, but you cannot have both. Roe versus Wade was not just an attack on the life of the unborn child, was not just an attack on the principle of equal protection for the prenatal segment of the human population in our nation. Roe versus Wade was a threat to our status as a free republic. Because what Roe versus Wade said is that we, the people, aren't the ones in power. We, the people, aren't the ones that get to make the big decisions. Instead, we are an oligarchy. We are a country where 9 unelected, black-robed arbiters get to tell us what is right, what is wrong, what is law, and what is not. I don't know about you, but as for me, I choose to live in a republic. We've gotten legislation passed and signed into law by Governor Stitt, which specifies that the Oklahoma state legislator or the Oklahoma state government will only issue birth certificates stating male or female for gender. So we're not going to recognize any of the 36 other genders. You think, that sounds like I'm being sarcastic. 36 is an actual number. I didn't make it up. That's the number of different genders that were proposed to be added into the list of recognized genders by the state bureaucracy. And our legislator basically said, none of this nonsense. And who would have thought, right? Who would have thought that this is a question that we have to settle through legislation? So what happened with all these other pieces of legislation? 20 of them were killed in committee. 20 of them were killed in committee. That's not unusual. In a normal legislative session, about 9 out of every 10 bills that die will die in committee. There are reasons for this. Some of them are very practical. For example, you'll often see that 2 legislators will have introduced very similar bills. So what they'll do is they'll kill one in committee, take its language, integrate it into the other, and then move forward as co-authors on a single piece of legislation. So that's not unusual. Sometimes the legislation that's killed in committee is killed because it's just not very well written, and so essentially the committee says, look, maybe we like this idea, maybe we don't. It's not executed well enough for meaningful consideration, so instead of wasting our time on it right now, we want you to take it back, rewrite it, and bring it back next session. Another reason that bills are often killed in committees is purely political. Nobody pays attention to committee votes, and they're not all necessarily recorded, which basically means that if I am a politician who doesn't want to get caught, say, voting for abortion because I have to be elected in Oklahoma, the best place to try and kill that bill is in committee. And we absolutely did see some of that this session. But I'll go ahead and tell you that other than those 20, two of the bills that OK2A brought forward were killed by a vote. The rest were never considered. They were blocked from being considered. Our legislators wanted to vote for them. They were pushing to get them on the legislative agenda so that they could vote them into law. But leadership, especially in the Senate, but also in the House, refused to put them on the schedule. I'll let you reach out to Speaker McCall, to Pro Tem Greg Tree, and ask them why they decided, for example, not to consider, not to allow our legislator to even think or talk about a piece of legislation which would have protected homeowners who defend their home by showing a firearm. Because right now there are rules that basically say that if someone's trying to break into your home and you show your firearm, you can get penalized for brandishing, right? That can be a criminal offense. We introduced legislation to remove that policy, saying that if you're on your property, if you're in your house and someone's trying to come in, you are allowed to show your gun. They wouldn't let that vote, so it died. We had another one that specified that if somebody comes into your house and attacks you and you defend yourself using a firearm, you are innocent of any criminal charges until proven guilty. Because the way the law is written right now, you do have a right to defend yourself. We have a castle law. And it says that you can go to court and you can say, look, he was in my house, this person was attacking me, I defended myself, here is the proof. But you have the burden of proving that what you did was in self-defense. So OK2A worked with some of our star legislators, and we brought legislation that basically said, no, 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 no. If there is a gun death in your home, you are not presumed guilty. You are presumed innocent, and if the state thinks that something nefarious has happened, they're the ones who have to present that evidence. Killed. Wouldn't consider it. We can blame Democrats. There are a total of 9 of them in the Oklahoma State Senate. So, yeah, sure, they make a convenient scapegoat, but I'm sorry to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the real problem isn't the Democrats. Nothing in the Oklahoma State Legislature happens because 9 Democrats wanted it to. They have no power. They are essentially irrelevant in our state right now. The ones who killed these bills were, in fact, Republicans. This is not a bad segue into the next segment, where we can begin to announce our endorsements, because here's what I can tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, we can have Republicans or we can have rhinos. Republicans in name only. They are not the same thing. Ideology and integrity ought to be more important to you than simply the letter someone puts next to their name. Anybody can put an R next to their name. Consider, for example, Leslie Osborne. They're calling her Liberal Leslie. Show of hands, how many of you in here know who Leslie Osborne is? Josh, okay, that's not a surprise. Leslie Osborne is one of those state offices up for re-election. And if you ask me, after the meeting today, I'd be happy to show you a video in which she calls Republicans. Now, this is someone who is ostensibly herself a Republican, caught in a hot mic situation, speaking to a small group of children at a gay pride parade, where she basically calls Republicans gay bashers. She calls them gay bashers. She says, you know, maybe you want 50 anti-abortion bills from your government, not me. Maybe you want the trans bashers in charge, not me. And if that's what it means to be a Republican, well, maybe I was never meant to be a Republican elected official. She's up for re-election. She's being challenged by a candidate, OK2A endorsed conservative all-star Sean Roberts. So when you go to vote on Tuesday, that's the name I want you to keep in mind. Let's see. I'm going to pull up the full list so I don't forget anybody. I can tell you, Cody and Ron, will you all please stand up? Cody Maynard has been endorsed by the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association for State House of Representatives. And Ron Boyer has been endorsed by the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association for re-election as our county commissioner. Let's give him a round of applause. We have endorsed Governor Kevin Stitt for re-election against some of his leftist opponents. One thing that I will actually call myself out on, I was supposed to tell you a little bit about what happened with the special session. So Oklahoma received federal funds to basically help our state address COVID-19 and the shutdowns and the economic fallout, and alleviate some of the tensions created in day-to-day households by the inflation crisis facing our country right now. And the state legislature failed before sine die, May 27th, the last day to pass or fail legislation. They failed to either pass legislation specifying how that money sent to the state already in our coffers could be used, meaning it can't be used because they have to direct it. They have the power of the purse strings. Or addressing the issue of inflation at all. So Governor Kevin Stitt basically called for a special session that started on the 13th of this month. And at special session, 9 separate bills addressing inflation passed, including one which would have repealed the tax on groceries so that you don't have to give Uncle Sam, or I guess Uncle Oklahoma, a cut when you go to buy milk for your children. And a reduction in the income tax so you can keep more of your own hard-earned money. State legislator didn't necessarily like that, or at least leadership did not necessarily like that. And so what they did is they passed the bills, some of them in the House and some of them in the Senate. But then before the House could get the Senate bills, or the Senate could get the House bills, the House declared sine die and went home. no bill can be signed into law without being approved by both the House and Senate independently but in identical format. So what they did is they basically gave their members an opportunity to say, oh, I voted for this, while ensuring that nothing actually happened so that they can blame Governor Kevin Stitt, and he becomes the scapegoat. But no, that was not Governor Kevin Stitt's fault. I'm not trying to take sides or wade into a fight that's not for me to wade in on. Governor Stitt can defend himself. That's what happened. We did pay for that. Okay, so statewide races. Kevin Stitt is endorsed for governor. John O'Connor is endorsed for attorney general. Cindy Byrd is endorsed for state auditor and inspector. If you need me to slow down, let me know. For state superintendent, we've got Ryan Walters, who's actually from McAllister. Nice guy. I've met him once. For state labor commissioner, that's Sean Roberts. He's the one running against liberal Leslie. And for state treasurer, we've got Todd Russ. Todd Russ. We have not endorsed anyone in the race for corporate commissioner at this time. For the federal races, specifically to our district, Nathan Dahm is endorsed. Jackson Lemire is endorsed. John Bennett is endorsed. And for local races, I've already announced Cody Maynard and Ron Boyer. Today's speaker is a good friend of mine, a fourth-generation rancher, native-born Oklahoman, and business owner by the name of Josh Brecheen. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you during one of our prior meetings that I think America is at a precipice, that before us at this time is a very important choice. The decisions we make on Tuesday are going to impact the outcomes in November, and therefore they're going to shape the leadership of our state and country for a very long time. But I'm also going to go ahead and tell you again that what really, really matters isn't that we send Republicans to Washington, D.C. What matters is that we send the right Republicans, that we send men who have integrity and whose ideology conforms to our own beliefs, whose ideology is consistent with what we want and need from government. I can tell you, Connor Alford, can go ahead and tell you right now that is Josh Brecheen. I think that at this point, there are 14 candidates running to represent our district in the United States House. It's a crowded marketplace. I cannot speak to every candidate, and I'm not going to call anyone out by name at this time. Ask me in private, and then I'll gripe. No, I won't. I think the choices that are available to us could not be more drastically different. As I've said, we can have Republicans or we can have rhinos. There are at least a couple in that race. We can have abortion or we can have America. We can have results or we can have rhetoric. Ladies and gentlemen, winning an election is absolutely meaningless if we lose our nation. That's a quote that I stole from Josh Brecheen. And I agree with that quote. You know, if you think about it, I had the honor of preaching a sermon about the sanctity of life this past Sunday, and I got to talk about how, as Christians, we're not just called to abstain from oppression. As Christians, we are called to stand up against oppression, not just to bandage the wounds of those beneath the wheels of injustice, but to drive a spoke through that wheel itself. We need men of action. We need men who can give us results and not rhetoric. And Josh Brecheen has that record of delivering results. And by the way, it's not just that Josh Brecheen votes the right way, or that Josh Brecheen not only votes the right way, but takes leadership and pushes the right laws by getting other legislators to join in. He puts his money where his mouth is. As a state legislator, a servant leader, Josh Brecheen donated half of every paycheck that he received through the Bryan County Crisis Pregnancy Center. I can tell you right now that the Bryan County Crisis Pregnancy Center wouldn't be anywhere near where it is right now without his leadership, his generosity, his support, and his defense for the sanctity of life in our country. He has been integral in the defense of Second Amendment liberties. He is one of the few candidates who has been able to intelligently address and discuss solutions to the issues facing our country, like inflation. And he has been willing to go to bat for us when others prefer to stay home or walk important votes. As Christians, we need men of action in Washington, D.C. It wasn't enough for David to grab his sling and a stone if he was unwilling to take a shot and stand up to the giants. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want somebody who's going to take the shot, who will face Goliath, who isn't afraid to be hated, Josh Brecheen's your man. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker, conservative rock star, servant leader, Josh Brecheen.
I between the endorsement here and this, I mean, let's open up for questions. I mean, I'm flattered. It's not me. It's the ideology. It's the ideology and the ability to go forward with that ideology. And I mean that. I was on an interview with Jim Bridenstine, who's endorsed us in this race. Some of you may remember Jim Bridenstine's service. Trump put him over NASA, and before that, he was in the Freedom Caucus. And yesterday, I was talking about, in addition to Paige, and I've got 7 former Coburn staffers that are volunteering their time, I mean, for free to help us. And I said this, it's not me. It's the ideology adherence. It's an ideology that I was mentored under by Tom Coburn, and it's a biblical constitutional ideology. And it says, you know, nation first, and I'm second. So I really can't add anything. I'm overwhelmed. Thank you. Let me say this, because I want to make sure that I'm a man of truth fully. So I didn't give half my salary to the Crisis Pregnancy Center. I made a sizable contribution out of every paycheck, but it wasn't half my salary. But it was a sizable contribution to keep my word. For some who don't know, when I ran, they had the 3rd highest paid part-time legislative body. Oklahoma did. And so when I ran to demonstrate sacrificial service, I said, I'm going to give to a charity to make sure I make the average what Oklahomans make, because I want to provide, you know, a standard of sacrificial service. And I did the same thing with my pension. I cut my pension. And so I just want to make sure I'm operating in truth. And I want to address one more thing. John Bennett is my friend, but I want you to hear this. He does have the endorsement of the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. John has a good record. He and I both get an A rating from the NRA in our time there. When I got in, prayerfully waiting until my wife said I'm in, they, from my recollection, calling Don Spencer, who's over OK2A, because I was one of their go-to guys in the Senate on gun issues, Don told me, we've already endorsed John Bennett. And that was before I think I even got in the race. So because I was last to get in, and because of the long-time relationship with John and Don, they made an endorsement. My conversation was, Don, couldn't you have waited till filing before people, you know, but we waited so late. And I want to tell you something. I actually am believing for a miracle on Tuesday. We waited so late, and those who look to timing on races, they looked at us and thought, you don't have a chance, because we filed the last day. I was the 14th out of 14 to file. And so to give credence to the mailers that you get, the hits, out of 14 candidates, this Fund for a Working Congress is spent sum total north of $200,000 in the last week on against us. And so I just put a thing on our Facebook, on Brecheen, or my own personal page, and I did this with our Jim Bridenstine radio interview up in Bartlesville yesterday. Thank you, Fund for a Working Congress, in a 14-way primary for coming against our candidacy and providing proof. You don't do that unless you've run a poll in a 14-way primary and you go, they're a threat to the establishment, to the status quo. And so what's happening is somebody ran a poll, and so in the natural, you could go, oh man, they're hitting us so hard trying to smear our candidacy. But it is indicative of the nastiness of what politics is, but it's indicative somebody ran a poll and said they're a threat to us. So let me give you, just so I can back up our conservative credentials, iVoter Guide, which is a group that you can kind of trust what they do. We're in this CD2 race, we have the highest rating based on my 8 years ago, before I self-terminated in the state senate. Our record, my voting record, is touted as the highest on iVoter Guide. We got that news today. Awake Oklahoma has endorsed us. Tom Coburn's wife of 50 years, Carolyn Coburn's endorsed us. 7 different Coburn staffers have endorsed us. Jim Bridenstine has endorsed us, and then Fund for a Working Congress doesn't know, but they've endorsed us by saying that he's not going to go up there and go along to get along. He's not going to go up there and join the establishment. We're a Freedom Caucus candidacy to go up there and get in the Freedom Caucus, to say we're going to put the nation ahead of self-interest, and we're not going to be risk adverse because we're losing this nation. We're going to stand against the immorality, the hypersexualized culture, and we're going to stand against the spending valve and not going to continue the spending valve. And we're also going to stand up and do what's right on this McGirt issue. I've never taken money from the tribes. I said that last night at a forum. It's not because I have any desire to be at a crossways with tribal interest. I actually carry a card. I'm Choctaw. But when I ran for office years ago, let me give you the history. You had people in this area that were receiving $50,000 salaries in addition to being a state senator. They were receiving a $50,000 salary from a tribe. And so their judgment as a, quote, consultant, it wasn't a true exchange of labor, their judgment was skewed. And let me ask you something. If you make, at that time, I think it was $38,000 as a state senator, and you get a $50,000 a consultant from a tribe, where's your loyalty? And so to solve McGirt, we have to have people who do the right thing for the right reasons. And that's the reason when I got in office, and we beat an 8-year incumbent Democrat, became the first elected office holder as a state senator since 1920, maybe since statehood for that seat. I received a check in the mail, both from the Choctaws and Chickasaws. I mailed it back, and I wasn't trying to be mean-spirited in that. It was just a way of saying, I want to do the right thing for the right reasons. On this McGirt issue, in Atoka County right now, if you are pulled over and you're going 11 to 15 miles per hour over, breaking the law, okay, upon conviction, if you're tribal, you're going to get a $95 ticket. If you're non-tribal, you're going to get a $265 ticket. The scales of justice are not blind. McGirt has created an environment where people that are victims are not getting justice because of a backlog of the inferior of the federal court system. And so we've got to have people who will do the right thing. I'm going to say this. A blessed nation keeps its word, okay? But there's lots of promises that have been made. There's a promise to tribal members. We've got to make sure we keep our word, okay? But we also got to make sure we keep our word to the guy who bought the ranch 75 years ago, and it's in his family, and you got water rights to feed your cattle, riparian water rights to irrigate your crops. And if we go into reservation status and it's tribal first, what about the promise to those individuals? And so a blessed nation keeps its word. So you got to have somebody who's right down the middle of the road. What's the right thing to do for the right reasons, and not afraid to stand up against tribal money. And again, I'm not trying to pick a fight. I carry a card. I'm Choctaw. But I know in my heart of hearts, as a person that believes in biblical justice, what justice needs to look like. And justice is blind. It's not tipped in one way or another. And that's why taking money from the tribes, I have a skewed look at anybody if I feel like they're a puppet of the tribes in Oklahoma. I learned that from Tom Coburn. Again, we do the right thing for the right reasons. Now, what's important to you? Because I don't know how much time I've got, and I don't want to, but I'll talk as long as you give me opportunity, but I don't want to make this labor intensive for a listener. How much time do I have? About 38 minutes. Okay. Who else is going to speak after me? Hi, Michael. Okay. Can we turn this into kind of a dialogue? So, who has a question? Who wants to talk about the real issues facing our nation? If you give me filler time, Ron? All right. Okay. Yeah, you bet.
If you ask questions, please do. I'll carry the mic back and forth, but so that the people who are at home can hear you, let's read them on the mic, please. Or say them on the mic.
Say whatever. Anyway, as a representative in the federal government, and even a representative in our state government, what do you feel your primary job is? What do you feel that this is the goal if you get to that seat? What are you going to try to do?
Good question. Good question. Excellent question. You've got to know the job duty. So, Ron, hear this. I'm answering your question, but I'm going to take a long route in answering because there's an education piece that has to happen here. I want to go back to 1900 with you. There's a book called Restoring the Dream written by a guy by the name of Stephen Moore. And he did an analysis of local, state, and federal spending in 1900. And what he found was in 1900, and Ron is a county commissioner, this is really going to hit home for you. I want you to hear this. In 1900 of local, state, and federal spending, that Stephen Moore, in writing this book, Restoring the Dream, some of you may have seen him on Fox News. He used to be associated with Cato years ago. But he found that 60% of all taxes collected and tax spent was on the local level, and only 20% was on the federal level. And by the time we got to 1990, those two numbers had inverted, they'd flipped, and 67% of all taxes collected and taxes spent, think regulatory environment, because you don't have the money to hire the regulator if you don't tax for it, right? 67% of all taxes collected and tax spent was on the federal level, and only 20% by the 1990s. So his question is, what's the job duty? And so that's so important. So this is what I want you to do. I did this last night with a group in Durant. I want you to cross your arms. I want you to uncross your arms. Cross them again. I'm watching Curtis because I want to watch his expression. Uncross them. And this time I want you to change which arm goes on top. Is that tough to do? Why is it tough to do? Out of habit, we've done certain things. You guys realize that, watch yourself the next time you get out of the bathtub or the shower, and what you'll find is you actually have a pattern by the way that you dry yourself off. You're really efficient at it, and you don't realize it, but you do it monotonously out of habit, and you use that towel well. And just pay attention next time you do it. So here's my point. We've become habitual by electing people who've made the federal government the specificity of all governance. And so I'm about to recite to you the job description of the Congress. Stay with me. Article 1, Section 1 says all legislative powers are to be vested in a Congress. Then by the time you skip to Section 8, this is what it says. This is what a congressman needs to know. And sadly, we're not intentional in sending people who know the Constitution, the rule of law. The rule of law is this concept that nobody's above the Constitution. The supreme law of the land is the Constitution. And so if you send people to D.C. who don't know that they are to be handcuffed by the rule of law of what the Constitution says, then they're a train wreck for you. And it's why we have gotten into such a habitual pattern of electing people who grow federal government at the expense of shrinking local and state influence. So here's Article 1, Section 8. This is the 18 expressed enumerated powers that a congressman ought to know. Number one, what the Congress can do is they can tax you. Sadly, they're really good at it. Okay? Number two, keep run this with your fingers for me, okay? So make sure I'm not spinning this. Let's count with me, okay? They can tax you. They can regulate commerce, tribal, interstate, and among foreign entities. Okay? So they can tax, they can regulate. That's two. They can coin money. They can enforce counterfeiting. There's two more. They can bring forth uniformity among bankruptcy, naturalization, immigration. They can borrow money. Really good at that one. We'll talk about that $30 trillion national debt. Okay? They can go after piracy on open waters. They can do post office and post office roads. Patents. It's a duty of Congress. All right? Now we're going to skip forward. D.C. oversight. They're in charge of D.C. Inferior court, establishment of inferior courts. I believe there's a solution from McGirt of establishment of inferior courts to where a federal judge can be able to no longer see by ethnicity if that person's tribal or non-tribal, to let cross-deputization of what used to be in Oklahoma and eastern Oklahoma, a state elected official, prosecutor, judge, let them wear in the afternoon a federal hat as a temporary fix for this issue, and let that person no longer see you as tribal or non-tribal, let them see you as innocent or guilty. And it fits under Congress's duty to establishment of inferior courts, and it's going to free up the backlog, and it's not going to be at a great expense. I believe this is a temporary solution for what will be 20 years of litigation on this issue if we don't move forward. And we've got lawlessness, folks. We've got lawlessness on this issue. Native Americans are being victimized, and non-Native Americans are being victimized. It's on both sides. Okay, so inferior courts, don't lose count with me. Let's move forward. D.C. establishment, inferior courts establishment. Now let's talk about declaration of war. Did you know the Congress was to be the one to declare war? James Madison said, father of a Constitution, he said, of all, there's no greater wisdom to be found in the Constitution than that clause which leaves the question of war and peace to the legislature and not the executive. Remember that, because I want to come back and talk about this international primacy, that we've only declared 5 wars in our nation's history of the Congress. We were successful in all 5 of them. And in so many different years of letting the president since 73 through the War Powers Act drive the train instead of the will of the people being there, we find ourselves in problems in foreign affairs. All right, declare war. Navy oversight, militia oversight, Army oversight for 2 years. They feared standing armies. Then you have regulatory over the militia. Did I say militia oversight? I think I've already said that one. Then you have regulatory oversight times 2 of militia, mentioned twice, and then Army and Navy regulatory oversight, and then you have the necessary and proper clause, which Congress has driven through like a Mack truck, which I've sat in for a number of years, semis. That's what I've been doing since I left office, is dozers, excavators, trucking. And so, but that necessary and proper clause is talking about all those other 17 enumerated powers and saying everything to enforce them. And we have so misinterpreted it, and because we've not known the rule of law. So I just mentioned you 18 enumerated powers, and then you get the 10th Amendment, all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. It means leave everything else that's not listed in those 18 enumerated powers to the state, to the local, because you actually know your county commissioner, you actually know your state representative, you actually know people that can be effectual in the minutia of everyday life. And they wanted self-governance in tandem with a limited federal government, and because we've not been intentional, we're throwing this greatest experiment of liberty away. Sorry for the long answer, but you need to know that people need to know the job description to be effectual in D.C. The only way we're going to turn this thing around, let me tell you how much of a situation we have. You all know it's about $30 trillion debt. Medicare, what you may not know is Medicare is insolvent in 4 years. In 2026, the trustee report, that is the year we celebrate 250 years as a nation. On our 250th, our 5 times 5 Jubilee year, we will see Medicare insolvency. You know, there's a miraculous thing that happened in our first Jubilee year where both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died within hours of each other, 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed on 1776. In 1826, both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the year of Jubilee, died within a few hours of each other. And you tell me that's not miraculous? What you may not know is they were bitter rivalries after the presidency where they fought each other, and then they had a friend who helped them reconcile. And they were writing letters to each other. But it was a sign and a wonder. Both those men died on the same day, 50 years after the signature of the Declaration of Independence. So on our 5 times 5 Jubilee, Medicare's insolvent. Social Security's insolvent in 11 years. These are trustee reports. Medicare trustee report, 2026, we're insolvent. 250th year anniversary as a nation. Social Security report in 11 years at the earliest, could be 34. It is Social Security's insolvency. And then you have federal employee benefits that we owe. We have veteran benefits that we owe. And in addition to that, we have all these different trust intergovernmental debt programs that we've borrowed money from. And what happens is the sum total of that equals $120 trillion. The U.S. Treasury report tells us this. And this is how the U.S. Treasury report came out 2 weeks ago and said of the sum total of liabilities, that it's 80% of all wealth right now in America to pay off our unfunded liabilities. It's 80. They even write it this way. The U.S. Treasury report 2 weeks ago, Heartland Institute, maybe 3 weeks ago now. They said that 80% of all wealth to pay off our unfunded liabilities, it's inclusive of even the furniture. That's how the U.S. Treasury report talked about it. So we're in trouble because we keep sending people to D.C. who learn the game of giving back free candy to get reelected, both Republicans and Democrats. They don't know the 18 enumerated powers, and we've got to have people that are adult enough to go to D.C. and say, if we don't start buying vegetables, we're not going to have a nation left, no more free candy. Every one of us that got checks in the mail, you just paid it all back by the fact that inflation hits you to the level it hits you this year. $5,000 more this year you'll spend and no increase in buying power than what you did last year. There went your vacation. And you just paid back all those checks. The only reason we have inflation in this nation is because of runaway federal spending. Prior to 1900, we did not have inflation. You didn't. We had nominal inflation in the nation. If you watched all those old westerns, Curtis, that's why everything was $1 a day. Whether it was 1830 or 1870, it was $1 a day. And by the time we get to 1900 and we create this thing called the Federal Reserve, the creature of Jekyll Island, and we start to go into fiat money. The only reason that sliced real thin piece of wood has any value is because the government says it does. We moved off the commodity-based gold standard. And so because we can't drop something on our foot and say, ow, it floats. It has no real value. We live in a plastic economy, and we have taken what from 1900 to now, we've lost 95% of the dollar value of that piece of paper sliced thin, fiat. $100 today has the same buying power as $5 did in 1900. We picked up a 2017 printed $1 bill a couple of days ago and wanted to look at how much the devaluation has occurred since 2017? 16% since 2017, the devaluation of the dollar. We spent $6 trillion in COVID. $3 trillion of it was an IOU from the Fed. The other $3 trillion was actually sold at auction at the Treasury. And that $6 trillion we spent in COVID to keep everybody locked down, to give 10 pot governors the opportunity to keep everybody locked down, not work, and not be productive. The federal government helped empower that. Do you know the total 20-year war of Afghanistan was $6 trillion? That's what we spent in 2 years in COVID. All right. What other questions do you have? What else is important to you? Go ahead. Yeah, Curtis. He's okay if he just hollers it out. I think people can hear him in here. Oh, you want people online to be able to hear him. Here we go. I'll walk it to you, Curtis.
I've got two items I want to ask about. One is we've talked about dark money here tonight. What do you feel that can be done to eliminate that? And the second one will be, what do you think we can do to eliminate lobbyists? Major problems, I think, in this country.
So you've really hit me with a hard question. That's the truth. That's a hard question. And the answer to both those is I don't know. And so I'll have to get educated to figure out, what we don't want to do is we want people to engage in freedom of expression. In terms of transparency matters. And so some of the things that Bill talked about tonight, I mean, I'm listening, and most of the people that are calling for campaign finance reform are on the leftist side. And so I'm open to the concept. We need honesty and we need transparency. And so to answer your question, honestly, I don't know. And that's a good place to be. If I'm presenting a case that says, as somebody's been working in the free market the last 4 years, and it's been 15, 20 years since I worked for Tom Coburn years ago, there's a lot of things that I might get educated on, and that's one of them. So I hope you heard an honest answer there. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, so as I mentioned, Supreme Court opinion link Dobbs suggests that within the next week or two, Roe versus Wade might get overturned. I asked this to another candidate, and he said at that point becomes a state issue, which de facto is true. Overturning Roe versus Wade doesn't make abortion illegal in our country. It allows states to make up their own rules. California's legislator is currently considering a law which would allow post-birth abortion, 28 days after birth under certain circumstances. So here's my question to you. If you are elected and Roe versus Wade is in fact overturned, then what is your next step as a federal legislator to fight for equal protection to the unborn and against the billion-dollar abortion industry?
So I believe that you're going to have sheep states and goat states. You're going to have sheep states and goat states, and I believe our state's a sheep state. And I believe that every one of us in this room, with everyone listening, with all Oklahomans, holding these people accountable, who for years loved to play the quote pro-life game, but not really be pro-life in their hearts. I've seen it. I've seen the private conversations with people who quote claim to be pro-life get into a private conversation with people that are chairmen of committee and say, "Quit running those kind of bills. You're making us all look bad. I'm going to vomit." And so and I'm talking about Republicans, okay? And so they're out there, they're real, they run on the Republican platform, they really don't believe in the principles. When I ran years ago, and this was, you didn't run as a Republican when I ran in 2010. You didn't. And I think what you see from Southeast Oklahoma, you see some of the most conservative people, I'm not saying all, but some of the most conservative, because they had to fight to be conservative years ago if they were really in the fight years ago. And sadly, in Oklahoma City, you have to look down and go, man, it's the guys from Southeast Oklahoma on the pro-life issues that are really the leaders, or standing up against the hypersexualized LGBTQIA plus. I had to learn those last two acronyms in the last 2 days because I didn't even know they'd added that. And y'all, my heart goes out to people that struggle. My heart goes out to them. But the truth is that I didn't say homosexuality was wrong. The Bible did. I just repeat it. You know what I mean? And so the message that we share is that we believe in a constitution that was hinged on biblical truth. In fact, we have a founder, John Adams, that said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Okay? So our Constitution was to have self-governance and biblical virtue undergirding so you could maintain limited government. Now, let me not evade the question, okay, because I don't want to do that. I just got on a rabbit trail in my head. But as a federal elected official who understands that the Declaration of Independence is hinged to the Constitution, most people don't know that. They love to talk about the Constitution, but they'll never talk about endowed by our Creator by certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution is the second-tier document behind the birth certificate of the Declaration of Independence. And that you can see that in the very last wording of the U.S. Constitution. It says, of the 12th. Go pull up the Constitution. The very last word of the U.S. Constitution says, of the 12th. Meaning, by the time it was ratified, it was 12 years ago when we were hinged on the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is the birth certificate. So when it says we're endowed by our Creator, we actually have a nation that was founded on biblical truth and on God. And to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, life, liberty, life. So if you're asking me what I believe is constitutionally the role of a federal elected official, it is to secure the right to life. And so can I tell you that all on my own that we can get a federal amendment to solve the issues in California when we're hoping all the sheep states do what's right? I can't promise you, but I can promise you I'll be up there talking about that and reasoning with people and saying if you really believe in the Constitution is hinged on the Declaration of Independence, your job is to secure the right to life. Okay.
I got a mic here. So.
Do we have, I see a hand over here. Yeah. I'll ask you in a second. There you go. Thank you so much.
Josh, my concern is your plan to reduce the size of government. I'm very concerned about our self-defense, the military. You know, are you going to reduce ships? Are you not going to let our military people have the right equipment? You know, are you going to reduce personnel? The civil service people who support those people, you know, are in the military. So that's mainly my concern is our self-defense.
So I believe in the concept the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. And so I don't know if you were here a while ago when I cited the 18 enumerated powers. Declaration of war, militia, army, navy. Then you have the regulatory oversight on the militia. Then you have regulatory oversight of Army and Navy. Almost 1/4 of our enumerated powers is defense. So it is why it's constitutional to make sure that we are strong to be able to defend ourselves. So do I think everything has to be looked at? Yeah. Coburn was notorious. There's a sacred cow among most Republicans. Don't touch anything in defense. Okay? However, it was Thomas Jefferson after the Barbary States Wars who actually cut some things because this is what Thomas Jefferson said. Thomas Jefferson said we should not allow our leaders to rule over us with perpetual debt. We should not allow our rulers to load us with perpetual debt. It's the same Thomas Jefferson who years later said, he called it the abusive state of man. And he said this. He used a Latin term, and he said, the forehorse of this frightful team is public debt. Taxation follows that, and in its train is wretchedness and oppression. And so Thomas Jefferson also looked at the full book. And so this is what I would tell you. For me to try to sell candy in this moment and say I'm not going to look at the $43 million that was spent to put a natural gas plant in Afghanistan by the DOD, no. So we're going to scrutinize DOD too, but not at the expense of making sure if we are ever hit, we can respond with strength. And so everything's on the table, but defense of our nation is more than enumerated powers. It's 1/4 of the enumerated powers of the Constitution. But when you spend $43 million, it wasn't just all the things we walked away from over there, and helicopters and all the weaponry. They left a $43 million trying to convert Afghanistan over to natural gas, and they didn't have the vehicles to do it. So there's silliness all throughout the federal government. And you have to have somebody. One of the things I want to do is get on the Oversight Committee, work with the GAO. The Government Accountability Office, Coburn always talked about them. You could trust their numbers. And the GAO, you can subpoena every area of the federal government. And to put them under oath and to scrub them and embarrass them when they use your tax dollars improperly. Yes, back in the back.
I'm coming.
What about the J6 detainees?
So you're using acronyms, and I have to speed up to catch with some of this terminology. So you're talking about January 6th when you use J6. I've not been watching a whole lot of news. I've been. So that must be. Is that a new term they're using on the news now for January 6th, or is that just your term? Okay, it's a new term. All right. Okay. So if you're asking me about the circus and the theater in Washington, D.C., it's circus and it's theater. It's designed to get our focus off of inflation. It's designed to get our focus off of high gas prices. And sadly, I think some of them actually believe that it's the most important thing. Some of them sadly believe it's the most important thing, and they're wrong. January 6th and all that occurred on January 6th, there was a lack of wisdom, but to criminalize what was a lack of wisdom is just, it's a circus. And we got bigger problems in this nation to face. I just touted you. We're on a fiscal and moral cliff, and we're chasing these shiny objects out there. Did I answer your question? Oh, well, the Constitution, you might people that are in prison, the Constitution guarantees you a right to a speedy trial. That's the rule of law. And so they're in breach of the rule of law. No one is to be above the rule of law. All right. Ron?
How many times do we hear that it's illegal? They did it wrong. They broke the law. They did this. They did that. And then a week later, nothing happens. 2 weeks later, and 6 months later. Well, I believe what's happening is that's why we got such lawlessness going on in this country right now. Everybody believes they can break the law and get away with it. There's no recourse, no responsibility. Just do it. And it is happening. Somebody's got to start holding somebody responsible. And there is enough evidence, I'm sure, out there to put some people behind bars where they belong.
So I would answer that and say the power of the purse is in the hands of Congress. And so my goal is to get up there and get among a Freedom Caucus that turns into a bigger block than just 40 members. It's right now 40 members. There's a lady, I did catch the news last night, late last night, that there is a new Republican who I think hopefully she will join the Freedom Caucus from down in the southernmost part of Texas. And so hopefully that she'll be a 41, 42 member of the Freedom Caucus, and hopefully by the time that we've got such great darkness that light will actually, and common sense will start taking a hold in these election cycles this next several months, that we'll have I hope, twofold number of Freedom Caucus members. And then what you do is, Ron, is you get up there and you cut off the spending valve. If you want to get the attention of bureaucracy, you cut off the spending valve. Every agency that is thumbing their nose at you, but you got to have the votes to do it. You got to be able to walk around with, a little green card and says, leadership, I got the votes to hold things up. And you got to play hardball. Most people, when they get in office, you wonder how they come out with outsider views turn into insiders. It's because they're not willing to ruffle the feathers with leadership. My goal is not to go up there and be liked. My goal is up there to go up there and be under the laws of the Constitution and enforce the law. And can you do that with kindness? Absolutely, we must. Can you do that with gentleness? Absolutely. As a Christian, we must. And so I've been memorizing a good quote by Charles Spurgeon. For us to hate those who are in error, or speak of them with contempt, or wish them ill, or do them wrong, is not according to the Spirit of Christ. You do not cast out Satan by Satan. You do not correct error by violence. You do not overcome hate by hate. The conquering weapon of the Christian is love. To be able to reason with people, stay calm, because an offended brother, Proverbs tells us, is more unyielding than a fortified city. To stay calm in dialogue. Bill was talking about factions, the 1796 farewell address of Washington. Washington warns us against factions. It's a hatred. It's this volleyball net of hatred. Now, Republicans are the problem. Democrats are the problem. And the problem is really it's the establishment. It's the entrenched establishment who are all learning the game of giving away free candy and who are risk adverse to course correct, to turn this nation around. We have too many power seekers and not enough promise keepers in Washington, D.C. You shut off the spending valve. You shut off the spending valve. And you get enough votes to get it done.
Cody.
Since you haven't been watching the news much, I don't know if you got to see it yet. So the House and the Senate have passed versions of gun reform for the nation right now. I don't know if you got to see any details on it, but I'd love to hear your viewpoint of what they're passing and what you would like to see done, even to protect the rights we have.
So I did catch that. It was on the news that I did catch late last night. This is 28 counties. It goes all the way to Kansas, this congressional district. So, I mean, I was running on some nights, not all, but, well, I'll just say that sleep is being enjoyed when you can get it. So the issue of guns and thinking that if we can just, add more gun regulations, it misses the point. It's a hard issue. Spoons don't make you fat, and guns don't kill people. People kill people. And so we all heard the old adage, if you outlaw guns, only the outlaws are going to have guns. And so to try to capitulate, I'm saddened to see Republicans, when we've got the opportunity to contrast this liberal ideology coming along and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to join you in this effort in futility. I mean, not only does it betray their constituents who thought they were actually constitutionalists, but it undermines the platform of the Republican Party. The Republican Party, the only reason I'm a Republican is because the platform is solid. It's on biblical virtue and constitutional virtues. I've seen too many Republicans be rhinos in my years off and on of public service. It's why when I walked away and went back in the free markets many years ago, I'd kind of just washed my hands because I needed a break from them. I was so jaded by human nature. But here's the reality. The people we elect are just a reflection of us. And until we get the house in order, the church house in order, flaming with righteousness, which I don't have to worry about that with Bill Ledbetter. Until we get the church house in order and pastors start speaking the truth, and among one another. Did anybody watch the Channel 10 news last night? Anybody? I caught the news. Okay? They're doing an interview over this group, one of these businesses had posted a notice to say to kiddos going to a movie. I guess Pixar's got a movie out right now, a cartoon of two girls kissing each other. And the business was doing the right thing of saying, parents beware. And I'm so sad. The local news only interviews two people saying, I don't have any problem with that. That's in Oklahoma. How have we gone from biblical virtue to undermining biblical virtue so quickly in even local news? Y'all, we are losing. We are on a moral and fiscal cliff because we have people that are risk adverse and wouldn't make this kind of statement I'm making right now because they don't want anybody to pick it up because they're scared of the media. But Edward Burke said this: the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And so count me out on that. I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to do it in love because my heart goes out to people that are deceived. Again, the Bible says homosexuality is sin, and I'm repeating it. And so God is the ultimate author of what's right and wrong. And as long as we can point people saying, I love you, but I want to see you live up into a lifestyle that's going to bless you and bless your generations after you. And we do it with kindness and love. It's the same thing I would say to somebody in adultery. I love you, but what you're doing is destructive. It's the same thing I look to a thief and say, I love you, but what you're doing is destructive. I let God decide what's sin, not me.
I think we got time for one more question.
I want to go back to what this gentleman said about delayed punishment. King Solomon was so wise when he said, because punishment is delayed,
the heart of the people wanes, Ecclesiastes, right?
What can you do in Congress about the delayed punishment? We've seen people go in and murder in churches, many people, and they still haven't faced a trial where they are condemned.
So a lot of this is going to be on the state level. So we can dialogue about, in terms of what you think on the federal level they need to do, but one of the things that needs to happen is states. I listed the enumerated powers. Yes, the federal government needs to enforce federal law, and you've got the AG enforcing federal laws, but I believe we've taken too much law enforcement supremacy away from the states. We used to be in a place where the sheriffs used to be really, really effectual and powerful, and the local DAs used to be effectual and powerful. I believe the more power you send to Washington, D.C., the less opportunity you have to enforce quick justice. So my contention is return power and decision-making back to the states to let this local community go after lawbreakers. Does that make sense? Well, what I'm saying is, remember the thing we went through with the habits? Of sometimes we've shifted power and decision-making, and we don't realize because none of us were alive in 1900. And so we don't realize how much of law enforcement was local. We have the Patriot Act, okay? How many of you believe the Patriot Act has gone way outside the boundaries of the Constitution? Okay? And so, Fourth and Fifth Amendment breach of being secure in my persons and effects. And now we have these, instead of going and naming the place to be searched, it's just this wide open, you know. I mean, it's a violation of the intent of the Constitution in many areas. And so you have federal law enforcement agencies that are taking the lead all too often when it needs to be local and state people taking the lead. You and I can dialogue with local and law enforcement officers, and I think they would say, I think you're onto something there.
If it's all right, I might be able to clarify. If I'm putting words in anyone's mouth, stop me. So, Helen, your question was, what can he do in the federal level to help ensure speedy justice? Josh, I think what you're saying is that your answer to that question is that you can defer the authority to implement justice back to the local decision makers who are better able to handle it expediently.
Yes, if it's a state level issue, absolutely.
This money issue, where we say 20% of it's at the local level. Sorry. Yeah. The problem we have is we got 20% of the money only going to the local level. I work with the DA, I work with the sheriff, they're all under the budget I work with. And there's not the funds there to do it. They got 10 cases coming to them, pick the top 2, or whatever it takes. The McGirt thing, it's a nightmare. Part of it is because we don't have any idea who has the authority to do whatever they got to do. So, you know, they just let them go because out of frustration, there's nothing going to happen. So the money is all going now at the feds or they're going up to the state. So in my opinion, the state is somewhat guilty. Segue for you. It's somewhat guilty because they take the funds locally, take them upstairs, mix them in a big pot, come up with some fancy formula, sends it down based on demographics, based on something else, and we get funded. But we don't have any control. We get too many unfunded mandates from the upper law that we can't do because we don't have the funds, so we ignore them. And in turn, that's not the way we ought to operate. So all of it, I agree with you, needs to be pushed down. Because ultimately, the people here and out in the community are the ones that can control who's controlling what's going on. When it gets to the state, we lose visibility of them. When it gets to the Fed, we lose total control of them. Now, we have to depend on their honesty and their integrity to maintain that. But we've got to somehow get the controls back down lower. And then at that point, the public has to vote in qualified individuals to do what they're paid to do. And that's what we're not doing. Everybody is passing off. So the primary is on the 28th. It's probably going to be a very low turnout. It's an off year. I've heard too many comments say there's too many people running. I don't know who's running. I'm going to just let they all pick. And then come November, we got only about A or B. Somehow we've got to engage these people to get them back involved. You and I live this nightmare as far as politics. So it's very easy for us to adapt. I'm amazed at how clueless some folks are that we talk to. They don't have a clue. And they do believe the bingo cards that Bill was talking about earlier. They come in, they don't even have anything to base reality on, but, oh, they must be telling me the truth. They were mailed out. You know, U.S. Post Office don't lie. So that's my saying is how do we get the money back to the local level? Because now it's not coming.
Stop sending it to D.C. in the first place. The most effectual legislator in Washington, D.C. is not the one who brings home the most. The most effectual legislator is the one who keeps the most in your pocket, never going up there to be sent back to you with a loss of efficiency because the bureaucracy steals out of it.
I know the answer to this question, but I want to say it to make a point. I want to ask you to make a point. I know the answer, but I agree and want to obey the truth at the control of the school systems at the local level. But last time I was in Washington, D.C., happened to be in Senator Langford's office. There's about 30, 35 people there. And he turned to me and said, "Brother Bill, what's the biggest need in America?" And I said, "The biggest need in America is a top-down law that requires the history and the sociology and geography teacher, the history, sociology, and government teacher in our schools to teach the founding principles upon which this nation is built and how this constitutional republic works and why we are not a socialist state. Because we have a citizenry that believes that socialism is the best thing for America." Would you seek to impact that?
So, again, a lot of things, I think Bill does this, it's on a state level. I ran the bill that authored the bill that repealed Common Core in Oklahoma in 2014. It was a nation's first bill. What had happened is, taking the money from the federal government through a grant, Oklahoma was on the hook to obey federal authority or lose funding. And so it's control. They send you money, and then they control you. That's the game. It's the carrot and the stick. And so the solution for the indoctrination in the classroom is Thomas Jefferson said in order for the federal government to be involved in education, you'd have to have a constitutional amendment. That was Thomas Jefferson. Okay? Ronald Reagan was calling for an abolishment of the Department of Education, and when he was president, let's go back where we started, crossing our arms out of habit. I say the statement that we don't need the federal government in education, and you hear gasp. Because we don't know history. We don't know. We made it until 1970 without the U.S. Department of Education and did very well. And since the implementation and trillions of dollars in expenditure on education, we have not improved test scores. Subject matter standards, when I authored the bill to repeal Common Core, I had to do a deep dive. I learned about subject matter mastery. And I absolutely wanted David Barton from Wall Builders to get involved in coming into Oklahoma and helping us do true history standards. The solution, again, on many of these issues is sending power and decision-making back to the states. We are to have a limited federal government to do the 18 things I cited, and everything else to the states, unless it's a federal issue. We talked about McGirt. I talked to you about a potential solution because it is justice is going to the federal level right now because of McGirt. So that's a situation where you absolutely are going to have federal intervention. And there's lots of things, again, it's been 15, 20 years since I've worked on federal issues. There's lots of things that you could give me as scenarios where the federal government on the justice element, and I need to be retooled in that, okay? But we have a monstrosity of a federal government. And it's going to take, I spent 6 years learning about federal issues when I worked for Cobra. But, it's going to, everybody, because of the monstrosity size of the federal government, is on an education curve. Anybody who tells you that is lacking humility and truth. So there's lots of things that a future congressman is going to have to learn, and they got to be a good student and be willing to listen and learn. And I hope you hear, I'm not telling you I know everything. I know some things, and the things I don't know, I want to improve upon and learn better. If it's biblical and it's constitutional, then I'm there. And if it's not biblical and constitutional, then I'm going to be opposed to it. Thank y'all so much for letting me visit with you this evening.
Let's get a round of applause for our speaker today. So, I don't know about y'all. I'm a big believer in providence. I'll tell you one little professional development of mine. I've recently been asked to write a textbook on American government. And here's the really interesting datum. On chapter 3, where I take a step back and I talk about some of the historical roots which helped set up the foundation of our country. And in the introduction of this chapter, I quote our first president, George Washington's farewell address. I wrote that passage earlier today. And then Pastor Bill Ledbetter comes and quotes that exact same piece of historical literature in introducing and endorsing Josh Brecheen. Ladies and gentlemen, in that farewell address, George Washington told us that the alternate domination of one faction over the other, sharpened by a spirit of revenge, is itself a frightened form of despotism. I'm not very old, but I remember a time when our country wasn't careening from one crisis to the next. Show of hands, how many of you remember when the constant crises were an exception rather than the rule? This is a rather recent development. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I think I have an idea about a part of what that problem is. I think a part of the problem is that we have politicians in office and not servants. Because servants put policy ahead of politics, but politicians, it's in their name. For them, it's all about politics. It's all about the political party and not the nation. We live in a country where our leaders right now want to divide us by the color of our skin. And we need leaders who will unite us under the colors of our flag, red, white, and blue. We cannot keep careening from crisis to crisis. We need the Freedom Caucus candidates to lead our country in the right direction. There is no left and there is no right. There is only up or down. We can select leaders who will guide our country forward and up in the American dream, or those who will drag us down into the trash heaps of history, siding with European socialism and communism and collectivism over America. We need a candidate who will slay the giants. And you know what? If these qualifications are not convincing to you, let me ask you a question. Show of hands, is there anyone in here who's ever been in management or business? Anyone? Okay. For those of you who just raised your hand, show of hands, how many of you would hire an employee who could not explain to you what their job duties would entail? Don't understand the position. CPA doesn't really know what a CPA does. You're going to hire them? No. If you're looking for a CPA, Cody's over there. Go talk to him. He knows what his job is. And as you've seen, Josh Brecheen is a candidate who can actually tell you what the job entails. Here's my challenge to you. If you get face-to-face with any other candidate in this race, ask for them to quote to you Article 1, Section 8, because that's the job description. When I was up here announcing the endorsement for Nathan Dahm, I told you that Nathan Dahm was one of my favorite candidates for office that I'd ever spoken to, because in one of our first conversations, I asked him to quote a particular clause of the Constitution, and he knew it word for word. I have met very few servant leaders. In fact, I have met exactly 2 servant leaders who are able to do that, Nathan Dahm and Josh Brecheen. I also want to speak a little bit to some of the comments that Josh made today. Sometimes it can be hard to trust people, but I'm going to put my reputation on the line here, and I'm going to say that I trust Josh Brecheen as an honest person. And one thing I can also tell you is at the beginning when he was talking about the fact that OK2A, endorsed John Bennett, he said, Don Spencer didn't really realize I was on the ballot. Earlier today, I called Don Spencer. And I said, hey, what was the deciding? Because, by the way, John Bennett is a great guy. Josh Brecheen is a wonderful man, and I can vouch for him. And Don Spencer said we'd already made the decision before he filed. Everything he told you was true. Right? This is something that, by the way, he didn't know I had this conversation. He didn't know that I could verify. He came out and he spoke the truth without realizing that there was someone in the room who could actually fact check him. And I'm telling you, this is an honest man. This is a man with integrity who puts his money where his mouth is. This is a servant leader. This is the kind of person who we need in Washington, D.C. So I want to thank Pastor Bill Ledbetter and Lighthouse America again for hosting us. I want to thank Josh Brecheen for being here. And I'm going to do one final thing before I get off the stage. Cody, Ron, Josh, if you would please come up onto the stage so that all of you can be seen by the camera right here. And just wave to the people who are joining us at home. Ladies and gentlemen, remember these candidates. Those of you who are joining us from home, remember these faces. Remember the names Ron Boyer, Cody Maynard, and Josh Brecheen, because these are champions for liberty and constitutional government. These are the conservative heroes that we can count on to prioritize policy over politics, results over rhetoric, right over wrong, America over abortion. Thank you.